The day my husband's childhood sweetheart returned to town after 40 years, he packed his bags without a single word of explanation. My own son helped him move out, calling it Dad's last chance at true happiness. 3 weeks later, I received a gold-embossed invitation to their wedding ceremony with a handwritten note. Eleanor, we hope you can find it in your heart to be happy for us. Richard and Margaret. I stared at the invitation, the elegant calligraphy blurring as my hands trembled. 45 years of marriage erased with such casual cruelty. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My life with Richard had never been perfect, but I'd believed it was real. We'd built a home together, raised 2 children, weathered life's storms side by side. Now at 73, my silver-haired husband had decided I was disposable, a placeholder for the woman he'd always truly wanted. Our son Thomas had called me the previous evening, his voice unnaturally bright. "Mom, have you received the invitation yet? Isn't it wonderful? Dad seems 20 years younger. Margaret is exactly what he needs. She's so cultured, so sophisticated." His words felt like tiny daggers. When had my son become so callous? When had my husband decided our decades together meant nothing? I thought back to the morning Richard left. There had been no warning signs, or perhaps I'd been too blind to see them. He'd kissed me goodbye as always before his weekly chess match at the community center and simply never returned home. When I called Thomas in a panic that evening, worried Richard might have fallen or had a heart attack, my son had sighed heavily. "Mom, Dad's fine. He's staying with me for a while. He needs some space. I'm sure he'll explain everything soon." But Richard never called to explain. Instead, Thomas delivered the news 2 days later, standing awkwardly in my kitchen, refusing the tea I offered. "Dad's moving on, Mom. He's reconnected with Margaret, you know, his girlfriend from before you. Her husband passed away last year and they've reconnected. They're getting married." I'd nearly dropped the teapot. "Married? We're still married." Thomas had the decency to look uncomfortable but pressed on. "He's filing for divorce. It's all being taken care of. Dad says you can keep the house. It's not worth much anyway, and the neighborhood's gone downhill. He's moving into Margaret's place in Lakeside Estates. Lakeside Estates, the exclusive gated community where homes started at 7 figures. I'd expressed admiration for those beautiful houses once, and Richard had scoffed, saying we'd never belong in a place like that. Apparently, with Margaret he would. "This is insane," I'd whispered. "Your father is 70. We've been married 45 years. He can't just—" "He can, Mom, and he is." Thomas had checked his watch then, eager to leave. "He's happier than I've seen him in years. Margaret is brilliant. She speaks 3 languages. She's published 2 books on European architecture. They have so much in common." The unspoken implication hung heavy in the air, unlike Richard and me. I'd never had the opportunity for higher education. I'd worked as a nurse's aide while Richard finished his engineering degree, then raised our children while he built his career. By the time the kids were in school, I was in my 40s, too old in Richard's opinion to start over with education. Instead, I'd managed our home, volunteered at the library, and supported his career at every turn. When I called our daughter Catherine, I'd hoped for sympathy, but found none. "Dad deserves to be happy, Mom. You two haven't really connected in years. Anyone can see that. Margaret is his intellectual equal. They're planning a Mediterranean cruise after the wedding to visit all the historical sites they've both always wanted to see." Richard and I had discussed travel once, years ago. He'd dismissed my desire to see Europe, saying I wouldn't appreciate the history or culture properly. I'd buried that dream alongside so many others. Now, 2 weeks after receiving the invitation, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by the evidence I'd painstakingly gathered. Bank statements showing regular withdrawals over the past 5 years. Money sent to Margaret even while her husband was alive. email printouts from our shared computer that Richard had forgotten to delete, dating back 3 years. Photos from a private investigator showing them together at a hotel downtown 18 months ago. The truth was ugly, but liberating. This wasn't a case of rekindled first love after a spouse's death. This was a long-running affair, carefully hidden and meticulously planned. And now they expected me to attend their wedding with my blessing. My phone rang. Thomas again. I let it go to voicemail, listening as his message played. Mom, Dad's wondering if you're coming to the ceremony. Margaret thinks it would show real class if you attended. It would mean a lot to everyone. Class. As if my public humiliation was some sort of social etiquette test I needed to pass. I picked up the invitation again, running my finger over the embossed lettering. The celebration was being held at the Grand Palace Hotel downtown, the city's most prestigious venue. No expense spared for Richard's real marriage, it seemed. According to Catherine, who couldn't help boasting, half the city's elite would be attending, eager to witness the romantic reunion of two soulmates, separated by circumstance. For a moment, I considered staying home, nursing my wounds in private. But something hardened inside me as I thought about Richard and Margaret standing triumphantly before their assembled guests, rewriting our history to cast me as a forgettable chapter in Richard's life. A detour on his journey back to his true love. No, I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. I reached for my phone and called my old friend Harriet, who had stood by me these past difficult weeks. I've decided to go to the wedding, I told her, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Eleanor, are you sure that's wise? Concern filled her voice. It might be better to move on with dignity. I've spent 45 years living quietly with dignity, I replied. It's gotten me nowhere. Richard, Thomas, Catherine, they all think I'll just fade away without a fuss, that I'll accept whatever crumbs of a settlement Richard decides to toss my way, that I'll continue being the compliant, undemanding woman I've always been. I looked down at the evidence spread across my table, the proof of years of betrayal and lies. But they don't know what I know, Harriet, and they certainly don't know what I'm capable of. What are you planning? Harriet asked, a note of alarm in her voice. I carefully gathered the documents, sliding them into a folder. Just to tell 3 simple truths, Harriet. That's all. 3 truths that will change everything. The wedding was in 2 days. I had preparations to make. The Grand Palace Hotel gleamed like a fortress of privilege, its marble columns and crystal chandeliers a stark reminder of all the things Richard had always said were not for people like us. Yet here he was, celebrating his new beginning in extravagant splendor. I adjusted my navy blue dress, modest but elegant, purchased specially for this occasion, and stepped through the ornate entrance. A young woman with a tablet stood at a podium, checking names against the guest list. Eleanor Montgomery, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. She hesitated, eyes widening slightly with recognition. Oh, 1 moment, please. She tapped frantically at her tablet before looking up with a forced smile. Yes, Mrs. Montgomery, you're in the family section, 3rd row. Family section. How generous of them. As I made my way through the lobby, I felt the weight of stares following me. Whispers brushed past like autumn leaves, curious, judgmental, pitying. I kept my chin high, gripping my small clutch purse that contained the 3 pieces of evidence I'd carefully selected. The ceremony hadn't begun yet. Guests mingled in the reception area, champagne flutes in hand, admiring the elaborate flower arrangements, white roses and lilies, tasteful and expensive. I recognized some faces from Richard's company, others from our community. Many were strangers, undoubtedly Margaret's connections to the world of culture and refinement that Richard had always secretly coveted. Mom? I turned to find Catherine, approaching, her expression a mixture of surprise and alarm. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. At 39, my daughter had inherited Richard's height and analytical mind. She wore a pale pink dress that I'd never seen before, her role as bridesmaid evident from the small bouquet she clutched. "You came," she said, stating the obvious. "We weren't sure you would." "I received an invitation," I replied simply. Catherine glanced nervously over her shoulder. "Yes, but... well, it's just... are you okay? You seem different." "I'm perfectly fine. Because if this is too difficult, no one would blame you for leaving. It might be easier for everyone." "Easier for whom, Catherine?" I asked quietly. "For... you? For your father? For the woman he's been seeing behind my back for years?" Her eyes widened. "That's not... Dad only reconnected with Margaret recently, after Herbert died." I smiled thinly. "Is that what he told you?" Before she could respond, Thomas appeared at her side, his new wife Vanessa trailing behind him. At 42, my son was Richard's spitting image, same distinguished gray at the temples, same confident posture that bordered on arrogance. "Mom," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "You're actually here." "I am." "Well, that's good. Very mature of you." He cleared his throat. "Dad will appreciate it." "Will he?" I glanced around the opulent space. He seems to have spared no expense for this celebration. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "Margaret comes from money. Her family owned publishing houses in New York." "How fortunate for your father." An awkward silence fell between us. Vanessa, always uncomfortable with family tension, excused herself to find their seats. Catherine continued to study me as if trying to decipher a particularly challenging puzzle. "You look different, Mom," she finally said. I touched my silver hair, styled by a professional for the first time in decades. "I visited a salon yesterday." "No, it's not that. You seem, I don't know, not yourself." Thomas checked his watch. "The ceremonies, starting in 10 minutes. We should find our places." He hesitated, then asked reluctantly, "Do you want me to show you to your seat, Mom?" "I can manage, thank you." As they turned to leave, I added, "Oh, Thomas, where's Matthew today?" My grandson was conspicuously absent. At 15, he was the only family member who had expressed genuine distress over Richard's abandonment, calling me weekly to check in. Thomas's expression darkened. He refused to come. Had a soccer tournament he couldn't miss. Typical teenage rebellion. I made a mental note to call Matthew later. Perhaps my grandson had more wisdom than the adults in the family. I moved into the ceremony room, which had been transformed into a vision of elegance, white drapery, twinkling lights, and more flowers than a funeral home. I slipped into my assigned seat in the family section, nodding politely to the strangers around me. From my vantage point, I could see the ornate altar where Richard would soon pledge himself to another woman, erasing our life together with new vows. The room filled quickly. A string quartet began playing classical pieces I couldn't name, another reminder of the cultural education I'd never received. Behind me, I overheard snippets of conversation. "Can't believe she actually came." Such an awkward situation. Margaret is brilliant, published in academic journals. Always seemed mismatched with her, if we're being honest. I kept my eyes forward, back straight, expression neutral. Let them talk. Their gossip meant nothing compared to what I knew. Then Richard entered from a side door, taking his position at the altar. At 70, my husband still cut an impressive figure in his tailored tuxedo. He'd dyed his hair recently. There was less gray than I remembered. His eyes swept the room, momentarily locking with mine. Surprise, then discomfort flashed across his face before he quickly looked away, leaning to whisper something to his best man, his brother George, who had never approved of me. The music changed. The guests rose. And there she was, Margaret Reynolds, soon to be Margaret Montgomery, gliding down the aisle on her son's arm. At 68, she was undeniably elegant, tall and slender, with expertly colored auburn hair and the confident bearing of a woman accustomed to admiration. Her ivory dress was sophisticated, age-appropriate yet flattering, the perfect outfit for a second, or was it third, marriage. As she passed my row, Margaret's eyes met mine. There was no surprise there, only cool assessment and the faintest of smiles, triumphant, almost pitying. She knew I'd come. Perhaps she'd even counted on it, the discarded wife witnessing her replacement, adding dramatic flair to their love story. The ceremony began. The officiant spoke of second chances, of fate bringing together two people who had been separated by circumstance but always carried each other in their hearts. With each flowery phrase, the narrative of my life with Richard was being rewritten. Our 45 years together reduced to a detour, a mistake corrected by time and opportunity. I listened as Richard and Margaret exchanged personally written vows, promises of intellectual companionship and adventure in their golden years. My husband's voice, usually practical and restrained, now brimmed with poetic sentiment I'd never heard directed at me. "You were always the one," he told her, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. "The one who understood me completely." I felt something shift inside me, not pain, but clarity. A lifetime of making myself smaller, of accepting less than I deserved, crystallized in that moment into perfect, diamond-hard resolve. When the officiant asked if anyone knew why these two should not be joined in matrimony, I remained silent. That wasn't my moment. I wasn't there to stop the wedding. I was there to reveal the truth. But first, I would let them have their ceremony, their celebration, their moment of triumph. And then, when the time was right, I would speak my three truths. Growing up in Millfield, my life had been modest but purposeful. My father ran the town's hardware store. My mother taught piano lessons from our living room. We weren't wealthy, but education was valued above all else. I'd been accepted to the State University with a partial scholarship, the first in my family with a chance at higher education. Then I met Richard Montgomery during my senior year of high school. Handsome and ambitious, he was already in his second year of engineering. School, home for the holidays when we crossed paths at a community Christmas dance. He spoke of bridges and skyscrapers with such passion that I could almost see them rising from his words. When he looked at me, I felt seen in a way I never had before. "You're different from the other girls," he'd told me during those early courtship days. "You really listen. You understand." Our romance bloomed quickly, intensely. By spring, we were talking about a future together. "I'd still go to college, of course," Richard insisted. "I want a wife who can keep up with me intellectually," he'd said. Then came the accident. My father slipped on ice outside the hardware store, the fall resulting in a complicated hip fracture. The medical bills mounted rapidly. Insurance covered only a portion, and the store struggled without my father's management. My college fund, painstakingly saved over years, was the only solution. "It's just a postponement," I told Richard when I explained my decision to delay college and work as a nurse's aide instead. "Once Dad's back on his feet, I'll save up again." Richard's disappointment was palpable, but he recovered quickly. "We can still make it work. I'll graduate in a year, and then I'll support us both. You can go to college then." We married that summer, a small ceremony in my parents' backyard. Richard had just accepted a position with a promising engineering firm in the city, his future bright with possibility. I told myself that my sacrifice was temporary, that my turn would come. But life unfolds in unexpected ways. Richard's career demanded relocations. My father's recovery took longer than expected, requiring ongoing financial help. By the time things stabilized, I was pregnant with Thomas. Then, 3 years later, came Catherine. "You're so good with the children," Richard would say. They need you at home. College can wait a few more years. A few years became a decade. By then, Richard had connected with influential people, joined the right clubs. Our social circle expanded to include people with backgrounds vastly different from mine, people with pedigrees and postgraduate degrees. It was at one of these social gatherings, a faculty dinner at the university where Richard occasionally taught engineering courses, that I first met Margaret Reynolds. She was visiting from New York, giving a guest lecture on architectural history. Tall, refined, and intimidatingly articulate, she commanded the room in a way I could only envy. "Richard Montgomery," she'd said when introduced to my husband, recognition, lighting her eyes. "From Westfield High? Class of '70? Richard's entire demeanor had transformed. "Margaret? Margaret Collins. Is that you?" "Reynolds now," she'd corrected, holding up her left hand to display a wedding ring. "But yes, it's me." Their conversation had flowed with the ease of old friends, or something more. They shared memories I wasn't part of, referenced books I hadn't read, laughed at jokes I didn't understand. I'd stood beside my husband, smile fixed in place, feeling increasingly transparent as the evening progressed. Later that night, Richard had been unusually talkative. "Margaret and I dated in high school. Did I never mention her? First serious relationship for both of us." "No," I'd answered quietly. "You never did." "Her father got a job in New York our senior year. We tried the long-distance thing, but, well, you know how it is at that age." He'd stared into his glass of whiskey, momentarily lost in memory. "She was brilliant even then. Always knew she'd do something remarkable." "Why did you break up?" I'd asked, something uneasy stirring within me. He'd shrugged. "Distance. Timing. Life." Then, almost as an afterthought, "She's married to Herbert Reynolds now. Publishing magnate, philanthropist. They have a life I could never have given her." There was something in his voice, regret, perhaps, or resignation, that stayed with me long after the conversation ended. After that night, Margaret's name appeared in our lives. With increasing frequency, she and her husband had purchased a summer home in our city. She was giving another lecture series. Richard had run into her at a professional conference, and they'd had lunch to catch up. "Just old friends reconnecting," he'd assured me when I finally expressed concern. "Herbert's always there. It's completely innocent." I'd believed him because I needed to, because the alternative was too painful to contemplate. Besides, I was busy with the children, with volunteering, with maintaining our home and supporting Richard's increasingly demanding career. I told myself that the occasional melancholy I detected in my husband was simply the natural reflection of a man in his middle years, looking back and wondering about paths not taken. When Thomas was in high school, I'd broached the subject of, finally, pursuing my own degree. "At your age?" Richard had responded, genuinely bewildered. "Eleanor, be realistic. What would be the point now? Focus on something practical, your gardening, perhaps, or those charity committees you enjoy." I'd swallowed my disappointment and nodded. By then, the pattern was too deeply established to break. Richard was the achiever. I was the supporter. He built the world. I maintained his home base. Our roles had calcified around us like amber, preserving us in positions established decades earlier. As the years passed, Richard's career flourished. He became known for innovative designs, was sought after for prestigious projects. Our financial security grew alongside his reputation. We moved to a larger home in a better neighborhood, joined the country club, took modest vacations. From the outside, we presented the image of a successful upper-middle-class couple approaching retirement, with dignity and comfort. If Richard seemed increasingly distant, if our conversations grew increasingly superficial, I attributed it to the natural evolution of a long marriage. We had our children, our home, our community standing. It seemed ungrateful somehow to expect passion or deep connection after so many years. Then Herbert Reynolds died. The news came through mutual acquaintances. A heart attack, sudden but not entirely unexpected given his health issues. Richard had expressed appropriate sympathy, sent a formal condolence card. 2 weeks later, he mentioned running into Margaret at a coffee shop. "She's handling it with remarkable grace," he'd said. Such strength of character. I'd noticed his increased absences after that, longer hours at the office, weekend consultations, an expanded gym routine. The signs were there, but I'd chosen not to read them, not to acknowledge the slow-motion collapse of my life until the day he'd packed his bags and walked out our door. Now, sitting in the third row of the family section, watching Richard and Margaret exchange rings, I finally understood that I hadn't lost him recently. I'd lost him decades ago, or perhaps never truly had him at all. But understanding brought clarity, and clarity brought strength. These people had underestimated me for the last time. The reception was held in the hotel's grand ballroom, a space transformed into a winter wonderland despite the mild September evening outside. Crystal sculptures caught and refracted light, creating prismatic patterns across the white linen tablecloths. An ice sculpture of intertwined hearts served as the centerpiece for the elaborate buffet. I'd been placed at what could only be described as the exile table, far from the wedding party, surrounded by Richard's distant relatives and a couple of Margaret's elderly aunts who periodically squinted at me with undisguised curiosity. The seating arrangement was deliberate, of course. Keep Eleanor contained, controlled, away from important guests who might ask uncomfortable questions. "You're Richard's first wife, aren't you, dear?" one of Margaret's aunts finally asked, her voice carrying that particular tone elderly women use when they're being polite but judgmental. "I'm still legally his wife," I corrected gently. "The divorce isn't final." Her eyebrows shot up, disappearing beneath her silver bangs. "Oh, I had no idea. How modern." I smiled and sipped my champagne. The aunt turned away, undoubtedly storing this tidbit to share later with maximum dramatic effect. From my position, I could observe without being observed. Richard and Margaret moved through the crowd like visiting royalty, accepting congratulations and well wishes. My children flanked them protectively, Thomas vigilant, Catherine radiant. The perfect family portrait, with me neatly cropped out. Catherine had always been Richard's favorite. Even as a child, she'd shown the analytical mind he valued, the quick grasp of concepts that he considered the hallmark of intelligence. He'd spent hours with her on mathematics and science projects, beaming with pride when she followed his footsteps, into engineering. Their bond had only strengthened when she married James, an architect from a prestigious firm, further expanding Richard's professional connections. Thomas, though equally successful as a corporate attorney, had always worked harder for his father's approval. Perhaps that explained his current behavior, orbiting Richard and Margaret like an anxious satellite, laughing too loudly at their jokes, refilling their champagne glasses, introducing them to important guests with practiced enthusiasm. His wife Vanessa stood slightly apart, her discomfort evident in her tight smile and the way she clutched her purse. I caught Vanessa's eye across the room and offered a small wave. She hesitated, then nodded in acknowledgement before quickly turning away. I didn't blame her. Loyalty in this situation was complicated, and she had chosen the pragmatic path. The dinner service began, a 5-course meal featuring ingredients I could barely pronounce. The elderly aunt to my left complained loudly about the fussy food, while I methodically worked my way through each artistic plate. I needed my strength for what was coming. Midway through the main course, I excused myself and headed toward the restroom. My path deliberately took me past the head table, where Richard was deep in conversation with Margaret's son, an investment banker from London. Both men looked up as I approached, their expressions shifting from animation to wariness. "Eleanor," Richard said, rising halfway from his seat. "Is everything... Are you enjoying yourself?" I smiled. "The salmon is excellent. You've always had impeccable taste, Richard." Margaret reached for her water glass, tension visible in the stiffness of her movements. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice carefully modulated. "It means a lot to us that you could be part of this day." Her words were for the benefit of those listening, a performance of gracious inclusion. I played along. I wouldn't have missed it. 45 years gives one a certain investment in a person's happiness. Richard's jaw tightened. Margaret's son cleared his throat awkwardly. "If you'll excuse me," I said, moving past them toward the restroom. Once inside, I leaned against the marble counter and studied my reflection. The woman looking back at me seemed different somehow. Spine straighter, eyes clearer. For decades, I'd defined myself through Richard's perception. His dismissal had left me temporarily unmoored, but now I was finding my own center of gravity. When I returned to the reception, the toast had begun. Richard's brother George was at the microphone, glass raised. "To second chances," he was saying. "Sometimes life gives us the opportunity to correct our course, to find the path we were always meant to follow. Richard, you've finally found your true north." The crowd murmured appreciatively. I resumed my seat, smiling placidly as toast after toast celebrated the destined reunion of two souls, temporarily separated by fate. No one mentioned me directly, though several speakers referenced fresh starts and leaving the past behind. As coffee and dessert were served, Catherine approached my table. She'd been watching me all evening, her expression a mixture of suspicion and concern. "You're being very composed," she said, sitting in an empty chair beside me. "Did you expect hysteria?" I asked mildly. "Honestly?" "Yes." She studied me. "What are you up to, Mom?" "I'm attending my husband's wedding as invited." Catherine leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Dad feels guilty enough without you playing whatever game this is. He's provided for you generously in the divorce settlement. The house, a substantial alimony. The house that needs a new roof and foundation repairs?" I interjected. "The alimony that's barely enough to cover property taxes and basic expenses after 45 years of marriage." "He could have given you nothing," she hissed. "It's not like you contributed financially." The casual cruelty of her statement momentarily took my breath away. "I see. And who raised you and Thomas while your father built his career? Who managed the household, organized the social engagements that helped him network, entertained his clients and colleagues?" Catherine had the grace to look momentarily abashed, but recovered quickly. "That was your choice. You could have gone back to school, built your own career." "When, exactly? Between your piano lessons and Thomas's soccer practices? During the 3 relocations for your father's career advancements? Perhaps while I was caring for your grandparents in their final years." She sighed heavily. "This is exactly why Dad needed to move on. Everything's always about what you gave up, what you sacrificed. It's exhausting. Perspective is a funny thing, isn't it?" I took a sip of water. "From where I'm sitting, your father's narrative has always been the one that mattered. His career, his needs, his happiness. The rest of us were just supporting characters." Catherine stood abruptly. "I'm not having this conversation. Just don't make a scene, okay? For once, think about someone besides yourself." As she walked away, I noticed Thomas watching us from across the room, his expression anxious. He'd always been the peacekeeper in the family, uncomfortable with conflict. I gave him a reassuring smile, which only seemed to increase his apprehension. The evening progressed according to plan. The cake cutting, the first dance, the carefully orchestrated celebrations. Richard and Margaret moved through each ritual with choreographed perfection. I remained in my assigned seat, observing it all with detached interest. like an anthropologist studying an unfamiliar cultural ceremony. Periodically, I'd catch Richard, glancing in my direction, his expression increasingly uneasy. He knew me well enough to be suspicious of my composure. After 45 years together, he recognized the calm that sometimes preceded my rare but significant stands. The last time he'd seen this particular stillness was when I'd discovered he'd promised Thomas's college fund to a risky investment scheme without consulting me. I'd said nothing for 3 days, then withdrawn our entire savings and placed it in a separate account under my name alone. It had been the only time in our marriage I'd directly countered his financial decision, and it had shaken him. Now, as the evening moved toward its inevitable conclusion, I could see the memory of that incident surfacing in his consciousness. His smile became fixed, his laughter slightly too loud. He whispered something to Margaret, who glanced in my direction with renewed wariness. They were right to be concerned. The moment for my 3 truths was approaching. The evening was winding down. The band had shifted to slower songs, and the dance floor had thinned as older guests departed and younger ones clustered around the bar. I was gathering my purse, preparing for my moment, when I felt a light tap on my shoulder. Grandma Eleanor? I turned to find a lanky teenage boy in a slightly rumpled suit, his tie loosened and hair falling across his forehead. Matthew, Thomas's son, supposedly at a soccer tournament. Matthew! I reached up to embrace him, genuinely surprised. Your father said you couldn't make it. He shrugged, the universal teenage gesture of calculated nonchalance masking deeper feelings. I told him I wasn't coming, then I changed my mind. Does he know you're here? Not yet. Matthew glanced across the room toward his father, who was engaged in animated conversation with a group of Margaret's friends. I took an Uber from the tournament. We lost in the semifinals, so... He trailed off, fidgeting with his cufflinks, a gift from Richard for his 15th birthday. I'm glad you came, I said, patting the chair beside me. It's good to see a friendly face. Matthew sat, his gangly frame folding into the chair. At 15, he was in that awkward stage between boy and man, growing too quickly for his own coordination to keep up. But his eyes, those were pure Montgomery, observant and intelligent. This is weird, right? He said, gesturing vaguely at the reception. Grandpa getting married when he's still married to you? Everyone acting like it's normal? I smiled at his directness. Yes, it's decidedly weird. Dad says it's complicated. Adult stuff. Matthew rolled his eyes. That's what he always says, when he doesn't want to explain something. What do you think about it? I asked, curious about his perspective. Matthew considered for a moment, surprisingly thoughtful for his age. I think it's messed up. You were together forever, and then he just leaves? For someone he dated in high school? He shook his head. It's like those midlife crisis movies where old guys buy sports cars and date young girls. Except Grandpa's too old for a midlife crisis, and Margaret isn't young. I couldn't help but laugh at his assessment. That's a remarkably accurate summary. And the way everyone's treating you. He frowned. Mom and Dad and Aunt Catherine? It's not right. I patted his hand, touched by his loyalty. They're in a difficult position. No, they're not, he said firmly. They're choosing sides, and they picked the wrong one. He lowered his voice. Dad keeps talking about Margaret's connections, how she can help him make partner at the firm. And Aunt Catherine's the same, all excited about Margaret's friends in the engineering world. This wasn't entirely surprising, but hearing it stated so baldly was illuminating. My children weren't just supporting Richard out of loyalty. They were making calculated decisions about their own advancement. The thought settled heavily in my stomach. Grandma, Matthew said, suddenly serious. Are you okay? Really okay? Because you can stay with me and Dad if you need to. I'll make him say yes. The offer, so earnest, so naively confident in his ability to influence his father, brought tears to my eyes. I'm going to be just fine, sweetheart, but thank you. That means more than you know. Matthew nodded, then reached into his inside jacket pocket. I brought something for you. Found it when I was looking for my birth certificate for soccer registration. He handed me a creased envelope, yellowed with age. I opened it carefully to find a Mother's Day card, handmade on construction paper. Inside, in Thomas's childish handwriting, "To the best mom ever. Thank you for helping me with my science project when Dad was too busy. Love, Tommy." Dad made that when he was around my age, Matthew said. There's a whole box of cards and stuff in the attic. Letters from you to Dad when he was in college, pictures of your wedding, all kinds of things. I traced the faded crayon, drawing. A crude but heartfelt depiction of Thomas and me working on what appeared to be a model solar system. Your father was so proud of that project. He won first place in the science fair. He never talks about stuff like that, Matthew said. But that box is full of memories. I sat up there for like 2 hours reading everything. He hesitated. There's stuff from Grandpa, too. Letters he wrote to you when you were dating. He seemed different then. We were all different then, I said softly. Matthew fidgeted with his water glass. There was one letter where Grandpa thanked you for working double shifts so he could afford textbooks for his final semester. Said he wouldn't have graduated without you. A memory surfaced. Richard's graduation day, his face flushed with pride, as he accepted his diploma. How he'd swept me into his arms afterward, whispering, "We did it, Ellie. You and me together." When had we become I in his narrative? When had my contributions faded from his memory? Anyway, Matthew continued, pulling me back to the present. I thought you should have this. To remind you that Dad wasn't always, the way he is now. Before I could respond, a commotion near the head table caught our attention. Thomas had spotted his son and was rapidly approaching, his expression a mixture of surprise and annoyance. Matt? What are you doing here? I thought we agreed you'd stay for the tournament. Matthew straightened, suddenly defiant. We lost, so I came. You should have called me. I would have arranged transportation. I handled it, Matthew said coolly. Thomas glanced at me, then back to his son. You didn't tell me you were planning to speak with your grandmother. Didn't realize I needed permission. The tension between them was palpable. I intervened smoothly. Matthew was just keeping me company for a moment. He's been a perfect gentleman. Thomas's expression softened slightly. Well, your mother's been wondering where you disappeared to. She's by the dessert table with your sister. Matthew stood reluctantly. I'll find her. And Matt, Thomas added, we're leaving in 20 minutes. Say your goodbyes to Grandpa and Margaret. Once Matthew had walked away, Thomas turned to me, suspicion evident in his gaze. What were you two discussing? I held up the Mother's Day card. Just reminiscing. Matthew found some old mementos. Thomas's expression flickered with recognition, then discomfort. He's been acting out since Dad left, questioning everything, challenging authority. He's 15, I said mildly. That's what 15-year-olds do? He refuses to give Margaret a chance, calls her that woman, and won't stay. In the same room with her. I couldn't help but smile. Smart boy. Thomas sighed heavily. Mom, don't encourage this. It's hard enough trying to maintain family harmony without you fostering resentment. I haven't said a word against your father or Margaret to Matthew. His observations are entirely his own. Well, they need to stop. Dad deserves our support. I slipped the card into my purse. What your father deserves and what he's receiving are two very different things, Thomas. But that's a conversation for another time. My son studied me, uncertainty creeping into his expression. You really are different tonight. I can't quite put my finger on it. Perhaps I'm finally being myself, I suggested. without filtering everything through your father's expectations. This seemed to unsettle him. Even more. He glanced at his watch. I should get back to Vanessa. We'll be leaving soon. As he walked away, I reflected on Matthew's unexpected appearance and the perspective he'd offered. My grandson saw the situation with the unfiltered clarity of youth, recognizing injustice without the complications of adult rationalizations. His loyalty was a bright spot in an evening designed to diminish me. More importantly, the Mother's Day card had provided something unexpected: physical evidence of the history that Richard and my children seemed determined to rewrite. A tangible reminder that my contributions had once been acknowledged and valued, no matter how conveniently forgotten they might be now. I watched as Matthew reluctantly approached Richard and Margaret, enduring their embraces with the stiff tolerance of a teenager fulfilling an obligation. When Margaret attempted to touch his hair, he flinched almost imperceptibly. Richard noticed, his smile faltering momentarily before he clapped his grandson on the shoulder and said something that made the adults laugh while Matthew remained stoic. In that moment, I recognized a crucial truth. I wasn't just standing up for myself tonight. I was standing up for a version of our family history that was in danger of being erased, for the reality of relationships that were being rewritten to suit a convenient narrative. I checked my watch. The formal reception would end in 30 minutes, transitioning to an after-party for close friends and family in the hotel's exclusive rooftop lounge. That would be my moment, when the crowd had thinned but the most influential people remained. The power evidence in my purse felt heavier now, weighted with purpose beyond my personal vindication. This wasn't just about exposing Richard and Margaret's deception or securing a fair divorce settlement. It was about truth itself. The stubborn, inconvenient reality that no amount of expensive champagne or romantic revisionism could erase. As the main reception drew to a close, I found myself momentarily alone at my table. The elderly aunts had long since departed, pleading exhaustion. The distant cousins had migrated to the dance floor for a final nostalgic spin to "The Way You Look Tonight." For the first time all evening, I had space to breathe, to think, to remember. I fingered the Mother's Day card in my purse, the paper soft with age. Memories cascaded through my mind, not just of Thomas and his science project, but of a lifetime of small moments that had seemed inconsequential at the time. Richard and I painting our first apartment, laughing as we accidentally brushed each other's noses with pale yellow. The night Catherine was born, Richard holding our daughter with tears streaming down his face, whispering, "She's perfect, Ellie, just perfect." The camping trip when Thomas was 10 and Richard spent hours teaching him to fish, patient despite the tangled lines and lost bait. Had those moments meant nothing? Or had they simply been overwritten by newer, shinier experiences with Margaret? I caught sight of Richard across the room, his hand resting comfortably at the small of Margaret's, back as they chatted with guests. There was an ease between them, a natural rhythm to their interactions that made my chest tighten. Had he ever looked at me that way? With that particular light in his eyes? Or had I been so grateful for any attention, any affection, that I'd never noticed its conditional nature? My gaze drifted to the wedding gifts piled on a table near the entrance. Expensive packages wrapped in silver and white, topped with elaborate bows. I'd brought a gift too, though of a different nature. The envelope in my purse contained not just evidence of betrayal, but proof of how thoroughly I'd been erased from my own life. I thought back to our 40th anniversary, 5 years earlier. We'd had a small celebration, dinner at Richard's favorite restaurant, joined by Thomas and Catherine and their families. I'd spent weeks planning it, making sure everyone's schedule aligned, arranging for a special cake, selecting a gift that I thought would touch him. A first edition of a civil engineering text he'd often mentioned as influential in his early career. I'd found it through an online rare book dealer, spending far more than I could comfortably afford. When Richard unwrapped it, There had been a flicker of genuine pleasure in his eyes, quickly replaced by something cooler, more assessing. "This must have been expensive," he'd said, turning it over in his hands. "I wanted it to be special," I'd replied. He'd nodded, setting the book aside. "It's thoughtful, but unnecessary. You know I rarely have time to read anymore." Later that night, as we drove home in silence, I'd felt the familiar weight of disappointment settling over me. It wasn't that I expected grand romance after 40. Years, I'd never been that naive. But some acknowledgement of our journey together, some recognition of what we'd built, would have been welcome. When we arrived home, Richard had headed straight to his study. "Need to check some emails before bed," he'd said. I'd found the book on the hall table the next morning, forgotten. Now, watching him shower Margaret with attention, I wondered if he'd ever truly seen me at all. Had I been a placeholder all along? A convenient support system while he built the life he really wanted? The DJ announced the last dance of the evening. Richard guided Margaret to the center of the floor, and they began a slow, graceful waltz. They moved well together, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. Around them, couples joined in: Thomas and Vanessa, Catherine and James, Margaret's son and his wife, various friends and relatives. From my solitary position, I observed this elegant choreography with a strange detachment. For decades, I'd stood on the periphery of gatherings like this, content to be the observer rather than the participant. I'd been the one who remembered birthdays, who arranged seating charts, who made sure everyone had what they needed. The foundation that allowed others to shine. Richard had once called me his rock, meant as a compliment, I supposed, though rocks weren't known for their excitement or allure. They were useful, dependable, firmly rooted in place while more interesting entities moved around them. I'd accepted the designation, even embraced it. Someone needed to be the steady one, after all. But rocks also eroded over time, worn down, by constant pressure, by being taken for granted. 45 years of supporting Richard's dreams while deferring my own had gradually diminished something essential in me. Not just opportunities missed, but a sense of selfhood slowly washed away. The dance ended. Guests began to gather their belongings, preparing to depart or move to the rooftop lounge for the after-party. I stood, smoothing my dress and checking my purse one last time to ensure my 3 pieces of evidence were secure. As I made my way toward the exit, I passed a large mirror mounted on the wall. The woman reflected there gave me pause. Silver hair elegantly styled, posture straight, eyes clear and determined. For so long, I'd seen myself through Richard's perspective, measuring my worth by his assessment. But the woman in the mirror was a stranger to that way of thinking. She looked formidable. "Mom, are you coming upstairs?" Catherine appeared at my elbow, her professional smile firmly in place. The perfect daughter, fulfilling her obligation to include the discarded wife? "Yes," I said simply. I wouldn't miss it. She studied me, suspicious but uncertain of exactly what she was suspicious about. "Dad and Margaret are already heading up. It's just close friends and family now." "Perfect." I smiled, a genuine expression that seemed to unsettle her even more than my earlier composure. We rode the elevator in silence, Catherine checking her phone periodically as if hoping for a distraction. When we reached the rooftop lounge, she immediately peeled away to join her father, leaving me to my own devices once again. The space was stunning, glass walls offering panoramic views of the city skyline, twinkling lights strung overhead to mimic the stars, candles flickering on high-top tables. About 40 people milled about, the inner circle of Richard and Margaret's world. I recognized corporate executives, university deans, local politicians, the power players Richard had always cultivated. A waiter offered me champagne, which I accepted gratefully. Dutch courage, my father would have called it. I took a steadying sip, then another, letting the bubbles fortify my resolve. Across the room, Richard was deep in conversation with the mayor and his wife, Margaret at his side, nodding at appropriate intervals. Thomas hovered nearby, clearly hoping to be included in the discussion. Catherine and James chatted with Margaret's publisher, likely angling for connections of their own. I watched this familiar dance of networking and influence building with new eyes. How exhausting it all seemed now. The constant positioning, the strategic relationships, the careful cultivation of useful contacts. I'd supported this ecosystem for decades, hosting dinner parties, remembering wives' names and children's accomplishments, creating the warm backdrop against which Richard could perform. No more. Margaret glanced in my direction, whispering something to Richard. He turned, our eyes meeting across the room. For a moment, something passed between us. A flicker of the connection that had once existed, perhaps, or simply the recognition that a significant boundary was about to be crossed. I raised my champagne glass slightly, a silent acknowledgement. Richard's expression tightened. He knew me well enough to recognize the calm before the storm. It was time for my first truth. I moved through the crowd with deliberate calm, acknowledging familiar faces with slight nods but refusing to be drawn into conversation. My destination was clear, the small raised platform at one end of the rooftop lounge where a microphone stood, presumably for toasts or announcements. As I approached, Richard broke away from his conversation with the mayor, intercepting me halfway. "Eleanor," he said quietly, his voice tense. "What are you doing?" "Participating," I replied, matching his tone. "Isn't that what you wanted? For me to be part of your special day?" His eyes narrowed slightly. "You've been acting strangely all evening? Have I?" I thought I was being remarkably composed given the circumstances. Richard glanced around, ensuring no one was within earshot. "If you have something to say to me, we can discuss it privately. There's no need to— But this isn't a private matter anymore, is it?" I gestured to the gathered guests. "You've made it very public. The romantic reunion, the second chance at true love, it's quite the narrative you've constructed." He paled slightly. "Eleanor, please, whatever you're planning—" "Excuse me," I said, stepping past him. "I believe it's time for a toast." Before he could stop me, I climbed the 2 steps to the platform and tapped the microphone. The feedback drew everyone's attention, conversations falling silent as heads turned in my direction. From this vantage point, I could see the entire gathering, the curious expressions, the anticipatory smiles, the sudden concern on Richard and Margaret's faces. "Good evening," I said, my voice steady despite the rapid beating of my heart. "For those who don't know me, I'm Eleanor Montgomery, Richard's wife." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone near the back whispered audibly, "I thought they were divorced already." "Not yet," I continued with a small smile. "Though that process is underway, as you can see." I gestured toward Richard and Margaret, who stood frozen near the center of the room. Traditionally, one waits for a divorce to be finalized before remarrying, but Richard and Margaret have never been ones for convention. Catherine was moving through the crowd now, clearly intending to intervene. Thomas looked paralyzed, his face a mask of horror. But it was Margaret who surprised me. She placed a restraining hand on Richard's arm when he made to approach the platform, whispering something in his ear that made him reluctantly stay put. "I've been asked several times this evening why I chose to attend this celebration," I continued. "The answer is simple. After 45 years of marriage, I felt I had earned the right to witness its conclusion, and to share a few reflections on our life together." I reached into my purse and withdrew the first piece of evidence, a folded document that I opened carefully. "This is our original mortgage agreement for the home on Maple Street, where we've lived for the past 32 years. The home that Richard has generously allowed me to keep in our divorce settlement." I looked directly at Richard. "What you may not have shared with our children or your guests is that the mortgage was paid off 12 years ago. Not through your engineering salary, impressive as it was, but through my inheritance after my parents passed. Surprised murmurs rippled through the crowd. Catherine and Thomas exchanged confused glances. My father left me his entire estate, the hardware store, the family home, and his modest savings. Richard advised me to sell everything and use the proceeds to pay off our mortgage, arguing that property ownership was the most secure investment. I agreed, believing we were building our future together. I folded the document and returned it to my purse. That home, the one you so magnanimously gave me in the settlement, was purchased with my inheritance. It has always been as much mine as yours, perhaps more so. Richard's face had darkened, but he remained silent. Margaret's hand still rested on his arm, though her expression had grown wary. I mention this not to discuss property division, our lawyers can handle that, but because it illustrates a pattern I've only recently recognized. I surveyed the room, making brief eye contact with several guests. The pattern of my contributions being minimized, dismissed, or forgotten entirely. I withdrew the second piece of evidence, a stack of bank statements bound with a paperclip. These are statements from our joint account spanning the years 1990 to 1995. During that period, Richard was between major projects, and his income was inconsistent. I took a position as an office manager at Dr. Levinson's practice to stabilize our finances. I looked toward Thomas and Catherine. Those were the years when you both needed braces, when Thomas started college, when Catherine was preparing for her advanced placement exams. My salary covered our health insurance, your dental work, your educational expenses. I could see Catherine's face growing pinched with discomfort. Thomas looked down at his shoes. When Richard secured the Sierra Vista project in 1996, effectively relaunching his career, my contribution was promptly forgotten. I was encouraged to quit my job, my presence in the workforce no longer aligned with Richard's rising professional status. The story became one of his triumphant comeback, with no mention of how we survived the lean years. Richard took a step forward. Eleanor, this is inappropriate. No one is interested in— On the contrary, interrupted a distinguished older woman I recognized as the dean of engineering at the local university. I find this quite illuminating. Please continue, Mrs. Montgomery. Richard froze, caught between his desire to silence me and his need to maintain appearances with an important professional contact. I nodded my thanks to the dean. My final point is perhaps the most relevant to today's celebration. I withdrew. The third piece of evidence, a manila envelope containing photographs. These were delivered to me 3 days ago by a concerned party who felt I should know the full truth before agreeing to any divorce settlement. With deliberate movements, I removed several photographs and held them up so they were visible to those closest to the platform. These show Richard and Margaret at the Mountain View Hotel in 2017, and again in 2018, and here at a cafe in Portland in 2019. The dates were significant, and the room knew it. Herbert Reynolds had died just 8 months ago. Margaret was very much married during these meetings. Herbert was very much alive. I looked directly at Margaret, whose composure had finally cracked. The narrative of reconnecting after Herbert's death is touching, but fiction nonetheless. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving, frozen in place by the unfolding drama. I am not here to prevent this marriage, I continued, my voice softening slightly. What's done is done. But I will not allow my life, our life together, to be rewritten for the sake of a more palatable story. I will not be cast as the convenient placeholder, the unrefined housewife who never quite measured up. I gathered the photographs and returned them to my purse. These are my truths. The mortgage was paid with my inheritance. Our family survived financial hardship through my employment. And this relationship, I gestured between Richard and Margaret, began long before Herbert's passing. Keep these facts in mind when you hear talk of generosity and divorce settlements or romantic reunions of childhood sweethearts. I stepped away from the microphone, suddenly aware of the thundering of my heart, the slight tremor in my hands. The room remained silent for a long moment, the air thick with tension and unspoken judgments. Then, unexpectedly, someone began to clap. Slow, deliberate applause from the corner of the room. I turned to see Margaret's son, his expression unreadable as he brought his hands together repeatedly. The sound hung in the air, neither approval nor condemnation, simply acknowledgement. Others joined, not in celebration, but in the uncomfortable, recognition of truths laid bare. It was the polite applause of people who didn't know how else to respond to such raw honesty in a setting designed for surface pleasantries. I descended from the platform, legs surprisingly steady beneath me. The crowd parted as I made my way toward the exit, creating a path no one dared to block. Not Richard, not my children, not even Margaret. I had spoken my truths. The first move in a game that had only just begun. The silence followed me into the elevator, the doors closing on a tableau of shocked faces. I pressed the lobby button, my heart pounding in my chest, though my outward appearance remained calm. I'd done it, said the words I'd rehearsed so carefully, spoken truths that had festered inside me for too long. Now there was no going back. The elevator had only descended 3 floors when it stopped, the doors opening to reveal Richard. His face was flushed, eyes blazing with a fury I'd rarely seen in our 45 years together. "What the hell was that?" he demanded, stepping inside. The doors closed behind him, trapping us in the small space. I met his gaze steadily. "That was honesty, Richard. Something our marriage has been lacking for quite some time. You humiliated me in front of everyone who matters. Colleagues, friends, potential clients. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I corrected the record," I replied. "Someone needed to." The elevator continued its descent, the tension between us making the small space feel airless. Richard ran a hand through his silver hair, a gesture I'd seen countless times during our marriage whenever he was deeply agitated. This vindictive display. Is it about money? Is that what you want? Fine. Name your price. I'll increase the settlement if it means you'll disappear quietly. The casual cruelty of his words struck me like a physical blow. After everything I'd just revealed, he still saw this as a simple transaction. My silence in exchange for financial compensation. "It was never about the money," I said softly. "It was about the truth, about recognition." "Recognition?" He practically spat the word. "For what? Playing the martyr? The long-suffering wife? That's always been your favorite role, hasn't it?" The elevator reached the lobby, but neither of us moved as the doors opened. A young couple waiting to board took one look at our tense faces and quickly stepped back, allowing the doors to close. Again, the elevator remained stationary, suspended between floors. "My role," I said, finding strength in the calmness of my voice, "was whatever you needed it to be. Nurse when you were building your career, hostess when you needed to impress colleagues, office manager when your income faltered, mother to your children, caretaker to your parents in their final years. I shaped myself to fill the spaces in your life, and I supported you completely. You never wanted for anything. Except respect," I interrupted. "Except acknowledgement. Except a voice in decisions that affected my life." Richard scoffed. "This revisionist history is beneath you, Eleanor. You chose your path. No one forced you to drop out of college, to become a housewife." "That's right," I agreed, surprising him into momentary silence. I chose. I chose us, Richard. I chose our family. But you..." I paused, the realization crystallizing as I spoke. "You never chose me, did you?" "Not really. I was convenient, available, devoted." Something flickered in his eyes. Discomfort, perhaps, or the faintest glimmer of recognition. That's ridiculous, he said, but the conviction had faded from his voice. We had a good life together. We had a life, I corrected. One where my needs were secondary, my ambitions irrelevant. One where I could be replaced without a second thought once a better option presented itself. The elevator doors opened again, this time revealing a concerned security guard. "Everything all right in here, folks?" he asked, eyeing us cautiously. "Fine," Richard said curtly. "We were just leaving." We stepped into the lobby, the security guard watching us warily. The space was relatively empty, most hotel guests either in their rooms or still at various events throughout the building. A few people sat in the lounge area, absorbed in conversations or their phones. Richard steered me toward a quiet corner, his hand hovering near my elbow without quite touching me. "Let's be practical about this," he said, his tone shifting to the reasonable problem-solving voice he used in professional negotiations. "What's done is done. The wedding has happened. Margaret and I are legally married now." "Yes, you certainly wasted no time," I observed. He ignored the jab. "The divorce proceedings are underway. We can revisit the settlement if necessary, make adjustments that feel more equitable to you. After tonight, I expect we'll be revisiting quite a lot." Richard's eyes narrowed. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Before I could respond, the elevator doors opened again. Thomas emerged, followed by Catherine. Their faces wore identical expressions of controlled anger, barely masking panic. "Mom," Catherine began, her voice tight. "What were you thinking? Do you have any idea what you've done up there?" Thomas jumped in, ever the attorney. "The accusations you made, the photographs, these are serious allegations that could have legal implications." "They're not allegations," I corrected. "They're facts. Facts I can substantiate." "Even if that's true," Thomas pressed, "there are appropriate channels for addressing such concerns. A private settlement discussion, mediation, not a public spectacle at Dad's wedding." "His wedding," I repeated, emphasizing the irony. "While still legally married to me. If we're discussing appropriate channels, Thomas, perhaps we should start there." Catherine stepped closer, lowering her voice though her intensity remained undiminished. "People are leaving, Mom. The mayor and his wife, the university trustees, Margaret's publisher. They're making excuses, but it's clear they're uncomfortable with the situation." "How unfortunate," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "Social discomfort is certainly worse than decades of erasure and betrayal." "This isn't you," Catherine insisted. "You've always been the reasonable one, the peacemaker. Perhaps you never really knew me," I suggested. "Perhaps I never really knew myself, until recently." Richard, who had been surprisingly quiet during this exchange, finally spoke. "Eleanor, we should take this conversation somewhere private, the four of us, like a family." "A family?" I couldn't help but laugh. "Is that what we are? Because an hour ago, your family seemed to include Margaret and her children, with me conveniently relegated to the peripheral former wife category." "Mom, please." Thomas's voice held a note of genuine distress now. "This isn't helping anyone." "It's helping me," I said simply. Catherine exchanged a look with her father, then tried a different approach. "We're concerned about you. This behavior, it's so unlike you. Maybe the stress of everything has been too much. Perhaps you should talk to someone." "Ah." I nodded in understanding. "I see. If I stand up for myself, I must be having a breakdown." "That's not what she meant," Thomas jumped in, though his quick glance at Catherine suggested otherwise. "I'm perfectly sound of mind," I assured them, clear-headed enough to recognize gaslighting when I hear it. Richard's patience finally snapped. "Enough. This theatrical display has gone on long enough. You've had your moment, said your piece. Now it's time to act like an adult and discuss practical solutions." I agree, I said, surprising them. Practical solutions are exactly what we need, which is why I've instructed my lawyer to file amended divorce papers on Monday morning. The new terms will reflect the truth about the house, about my financial contributions, and about the timeline of your relationship with Margaret. Richard paled slightly. You can't possibly— I can, and I will. I straightened my shoulders. The convenient narrative you've constructed ends tonight. From now on, we deal in facts. The main elevator bank dinged again, and Margaret emerged. Her composure partially restored, though her eyes betrayed her agitation. She approached our group with measured steps, shoulders back, chin high, a woman accustomed to managing difficult situations with grace. Richard, she said, her voice steady. Most of the guests have departed. I've thanked them for coming and apologized for the unexpected conclusion to the evening. Her gaze shifted to me, not hostile, but wary. Eleanor, I understand your anger. In your position, I might feel the same way, but this public approach benefits no one. On the contrary, I replied. It benefits me greatly to have the truth acknowledged after so many years of silence. Margaret studied me for a moment. Perhaps we could speak privately? Woman to woman? It was a calculated move, an attempt to establish a connection, to resolve this misunderstanding between reasonable adults while excluding Richard and my children from the conversation. I might have agreed once, eager to smooth things over, to appear accommodating. Not anymore. I believe I've said everything necessary for tonight, I replied, reaching for my purse. Any further discussions can happen through our respective attorneys. I turned to leave, but Richard's voice stopped me. You won't win this, Eleanor, he said quietly. You've made a spectacle of yourself tonight, but it changes nothing. Margaret and I are married. The life we're building together will move forward. All you've accomplished is to make yourself look bitter and vindictive. I faced him one last time. Perhaps, but I'd rather be honest and vindictive than respected for a lie. I allowed myself a small smile. And Richard, this isn't about winning. It's about truth, something you seem to have forgotten the value of. With that, I walked toward the main entrance, aware of their eyes following me but not looking back. The night air felt cool against my skin, refreshing after the stifling tension of the confrontation. A valet approached. Can I call you a taxi, ma'am? Yes, please, I said. As he moved away to make the call, I took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. The hardest part was over. I had spoken my truths, faced the immediate backlash, and remained standing. Whatever came. Next, the legal battles, the social fallout, the inevitable attempts to discredit me, I would handle it. For the first time in decades, I felt truly, authentically myself. Not Richard's wife, not Thomas and Catherine's mother, just Eleanor, scarred but unbowed, finally claiming her own narrative. The taxi dropped me at my home, our home, just after midnight. I paid the driver, tipping generously despite my uncertain financial future. Small acts of generosity had always grounded me, a habit my mother had instilled decades ago. Always be kind when you can afford to be, she'd told me, and sometimes when you can't. The house was dark and silent as I entered, flipping on lights as I moved through the familiar rooms. Richard had removed some of his belongings when he left: clothes, personal items, the books he actually read rather than simply displayed, but his presence lingered in every corner. The leather recliner positioned perfectly for viewing the television. The study with its imposing desk and wall of engineering awards. The framed family photos he'd selected and arranged, our history curated according to his preferences. I set my purse on the kitchen counter and filled the kettle, craving the comfort of tea after the evening's emotional marathon. As the water heated, I kicked off my shoes and allowed myself a moment to simply breathe. My phone buzzed, a text from Harriet. How did it go? Are you okay? I smiled at her concern. I'm fine, I typed back, said what needed saying, Tell you everything tomorrow. The tea was just steeped when a second text arrived, this one from an unexpected source, Matthew. Grandma just heard what happened. Dad won't tell me details, but he's furious. Whatever you did, I bet it was awesome. Call me tomorrow? A warmth spread through my chest, unrelated to the hot tea. My grandson's unwavering support was a balm I hadn't realized I needed. Will call. Love you, I replied. I carried my tea to the living room, settling into what had always been my chair, a comfortable but unremarkable armchair positioned slightly to the side of the main seating arrangement, like an afterthought to the room's design. From this vantage point, I'd observed countless dinner parties, family gatherings, professional discussions, always present but rarely central. Tonight, that perspective felt different. I saw the room through new eyes, noting how the furniture arrangement subtly reinforced hierarchy, how even the artwork reflected Richard's tastes rather than mine. The space suddenly felt foreign, a stage set for someone else's life. I sipped my tea, mentally replaying the events at the hotel. The shocked faces, Richard's fury, my children's embarrassment. Beneath the momentary satisfaction of speaking my truth lurked the sobering reality. I had irrevocably altered every relationship in my life. The question was, what came next? I had acted on impulse, driven by accumulated hurt and newfound clarity. But impulse wouldn't sustain me through the challenges ahead. I needed a plan, a strategic response to whatever Richard would unleash in retaliation. My phone rang, jarring me from my thoughts. The caller ID showed a name I recognized but hadn't expected, Martin Goldstein, my lawyer. Eleanor, he said when I answered, his voice alert despite the late hour. I've received 3 messages from Richard's attorney in the past hour. Care. To tell me what happened tonight. I gave him a concise summary of the wedding, my speech, and the confrontation afterward. Martin let out a low whistle. Well, you certainly don't do things halfway. How solid is your evidence about the affair? The photographs are time-stamped and authenticated. I also have hotel receipts, email exchanges Richard forgot to delete from our shared computer, and credit card statements showing gifts purchased for Margaret dating back years. Good. And the inheritance used for the mortgage? I have all the original documentation. My father's will, the bank transfers, the mortgage payoff. Excellent. There was a smile in Martin's voice now. You've just completely reshuffled the deck, Eleanor. Richard's lawyer is demanding we meet immediately to discuss recent developments. I'm guessing they're worried about potential fallout beyond just the divorce. What kind of fallout? Professional consequences, mostly. If Richard was conducting an affair with Margaret while working on joint projects with her husband's publishing company, there could be ethical implications, conflicts of interest. Plus, the social embarrassment is considerable. I hadn't considered these broader ramifications. My focus had been so personal on the betrayal, the lies, the revision of our shared history, that I hadn't fully thought through how my revelations might impact Richard's professional standing. What happens now? I asked. Now we leverage your position. They'll want to settle quickly and quietly. We push for significantly better terms. Martin paused. But first, I need to know what you want, Eleanor. Is this primarily about financial security, recognition, or something else? The question caught me off guard. What did I want? For so long, my wants had been secondary, subordinated to the needs of my family. Even my initial anger about the divorce had been tangled up with fear of financial insecurity, fear of loneliness, fear of a future I hadn't chosen. But tonight had changed something fundamental. Speaking my truth had awakened a sense of agency long dormant. I want what's fair, I said finally. The house free and clear, no conditions, no maintenance payments tied to Richard's goodwill. Half of our retirement accounts and investments, and recognition in the divorce decree of my contributions to Richard's career and our family's financial stability. That's reasonable and achievable, Martin said. Especially now. I'm guessing they'll counter with a quick settlement offer, hoping to contain the damage. When they do, we'll be ready. After we hung up, I felt a curious lightness. I had allies, Martin, Harriet, Matthew. I had evidence. Most importantly, I had found my voice again. I carried my empty teacup to the kitchen, noticing a stack of mail I'd neglected earlier. Sorting through it, I paused at an envelope addressed to me personally. Not Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery, as most of our correspondence was labeled, but Eleanor. Montgomery, specifically. Inside was a letter from Millfield Community College, responding to an inquiry I'd apparently made about their adult education programs. I frowned, confused. I hadn't contacted them. Then I saw the handwritten note paperclipped to the college brochure. Grandma, I looked up some programs I thought you might like. You always said you wanted to finish your degree. Maybe now you can. Love, Matthew. My eyes filled with tears. My grandson had planned this before tonight's events, believing in my potential long before I'd found the courage to stand up for myself. I spread the brochure on the counter, scanning course offerings and degree programs, literature, history, psychology. Fields I'd once dreamed of exploring before life took me in a different direction. Was it ridiculous to consider starting college at 73? Perhaps. But then I'd already done the most frightening thing imaginable, spoken truth to power, reclaimed my narrative publicly. Compared to that, enrolling in a few classes seemed almost mundane. My phone buzzed again. Catherine this time. I hesitated. Before answering, "Mom?" Her voice sounded strained, exhausted. "Are you home?" "Yes." "Is it okay if I come over? To talk?" Just me, not Dad or Thomas. This was unexpected. Catherine had always been Richard's daughter first, aligned with his perspectives, adopting his values. What could she possibly want to discuss that couldn't wait until morning? "It's very late," I said carefully. "I know. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." She paused. "Please, Mom." Despite my wariness, I heard something in her voice, a vulnerability rarely displayed by my fiercely self-sufficient daughter. "All right," I agreed. "I'll put on fresh tea." As I filled the kettle again, I considered the possible motivations for Catherine's visit. Was she coming as Richard's emissary, tasked with damage control? Or was there something else, some other reason she needed to see me tonight of all nights? I glanced at the college brochure still open on the counter, at the stack of evidence, in my purse, at the empty space where Richard's coat had once hung. Whatever Catherine wanted, whatever came next in this unfolding drama, I would face it as this new version of myself. Eleanor Montgomery, no longer defined by what she had lost, but by what she had finally found, my own voice, my own truth, my own path forward. Catherine arrived 30 minutes later, still wearing her bridesmaid dress, though she'd removed the elaborate hairpins that had held her updo in place. Her makeup was smudged slightly, evidence of a hastily wiped tear or two. She hesitated at the threshold as I opened the door, as if suddenly uncertain of her welcome in the home where she'd grown up. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "The tea's ready." She followed me to the kitchen without speaking, sliding onto a stool at the counter while I poured 2 cups of chamomile. I placed one before her, noting the slight tremor in her hands as she wrapped her fingers around the warm mug. "Where's James?" I asked, making conversation. "I sent him home. Told him I needed to do this alone." She took a careful sip of tea, then looked up at me. "Mom, I don't even know where to begin." "The beginning is usually a good place," I suggested, taking the stool opposite her. Catherine set down her cup, squaring her shoulders in a gesture so reminiscent of Richard that I felt a momentary pang. "After you left, everything fell apart. The few remaining guests made excuses and left. Margaret locked herself in the bathroom for almost an hour. Dad?" She shook her head. I've never seen him so rattled. I listened without comment, waiting for her to continue. Thomas is in full damage control mode, calling Dad's colleagues, trying to minimize the fallout. But those photographs you showed, people saw them. The implications are... She trailed off. Uncomfortable, I supplied. The truth often is. Catherine's eyes flashed. You could have handled it differently, privately, through lawyers. Like your father handled leaving me? With no warning, no discussion, just packing his bags and walking out after 45 years? She flinched but pressed on. What you said about Grandpa's inheritance, about paying off the mortgage, is that true? Because Dad always told us he provided everything, that you never had to worry about finances. It's true, I confirmed. The documentation is all there. Your grandfather left everything to me. The store, the house, his savings. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to secure our future. Your father preferred a narrative where he was the sole provider. Catherine stared into her tea. And the affair? The photos? Also true. Richard and Margaret have been involved for years, long before Herbert died. She looked up sharply. You knew? All this time? I suspected, I admitted. But I didn't confirm it until recently. There were signs, late meetings, weekend conferences, a growing emotional distance. But I trusted your father. I believed in our marriage, flawed as it was. Why didn't you confront him? Why stay silent all those years? It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself repeatedly. Partly hope that I was wrong, partly fear of exactly what happened, losing everything I'd built my life around, and partly... I paused, searching for the right words. Partly acceptance that this was my lot in life, to support, to accommodate, to make peace with what I couldn't change. Catherine's expression shifted, something like recognition dawning in her eyes. That's what you taught me, she said softly. To be the peacemaker, to smooth things over, to make everyone else comfortable at my own expense. The insight surprised me. Is that what you think I taught you? It's what I learned, watching you with Dad all these years. Her voice caught. I do the same thing with James. Minimize my needs. Redirect when he's difficult. Make excuses for his behavior to friends and family. This was unexpected territory. Catherine had always presented her marriage as perfect. James as the ideal husband. I'd envied their apparent compatibility, their shared professional world so different from the separate spheres Richard and I had inhabited. I thought you and James were happy, I said carefully. Catherine laughed, a brittle sound with no humor in it. We present well. Another skill I learned growing up, how to maintain appearances. She twisted her wedding ring absently. When I saw you tonight, standing at that microphone, speaking your truth without apology, I didn't recognize you. But I envied you. That courage, that clarity. The admission hung between us, reshaping our relationship in real time. For so long, I'd seen Catherine as Richard's daughter, rational, ambitious, slightly judgmental of my traditional choices. I'd never imagined she might be struggling with her own version of the compromises I'd made. I'm not here to reconcile you and... Dad, she said suddenly as if reading my thoughts. What he did was wrong. The way he left, the lies, the affair. All of it. Then why are you here, Catherine? She met my gaze directly. To ask you something I should have asked years ago. Are you okay? Really okay? And what do you need from me now? The simple questions, so human, so fundamental, caught me off guard. Tears welled in my eyes before I could stop them. I'm not okay, I admitted. But I think I will be. For the first time in a long time, I'm finding my way back to myself. Catherine reached across the counter and took my hand. Then I want to help, however I can. In that moment, Something shifted between us. Mother and daughter seeing each other clearly, perhaps for the first time. Not as extensions of Richard, not as roles to be played in a family drama, but as women navigating the complicated terrain of identity and self-worth. "Thank you," I said simply, squeezing her hand. The following morning brought a clarity that only a good night's sleep can provide. I woke early, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, organizing my thoughts. Catherine had left shortly after our heart-to-heart, promising to call later. Our conversation had left me feeling both lighter and more determined, the unexpected support from my daughter adding another layer of strength to my resolve. The doorbell rang just after 9. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a brief moment, I wondered if Richard had decided to confront me directly rather than through lawyers. I steeled myself as I approached the door. The man standing on my porch was a stranger, late 50s perhaps, expensively dressed in a tailored suit, his salt and pepper hair neatly trimmed. He carried a leather portfolio and wore an expression of practiced neutrality. "Mrs. Montgomery?" he inquired politely. "Eleanor Montgomery." "Yes?" "My name is David Reynolds. I'm Margaret's brother-in-law, Herbert's brother." I stood frozen for a moment, caught completely off guard. Of all the people who might appear at my door the morning after the wedding, Herbert Reynolds' brother had never crossed my mind. "I apologize for coming unannounced," he continued, "but I believe we have matters of mutual interest to discuss." Curiosity overcame caution. I stepped back, opening the door wider. "Please, come in." I led him to the living room, offering coffee which he accepted with a nod of thanks. Once we were seated, an awkward silence fell between us. "I imagine you're wondering why I'm here," David finally said, setting his cup down carefully. The thought had crossed my mind. He opened his portfolio and removed a manila envelope similar to the one containing my photographs from the night before. "I understand you made quite an impression at Richard and Margaret's wedding celebration." "News travels fast," I observed, dryly. "In certain circles, yes." He leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Montgomery, I want to be direct. My brother Herbert was a good man. Flawed, certainly, but decent at his core. His marriage to Margaret was—" He paused, choosing his words. "Carefully, not what it appeared to be publicly." I waited, sensing there was more. Herbert suspected Margaret's infidelity for years, though he could never bring himself to confront her directly. Pride, perhaps, or simply a deep aversion to conflict. Instead, he confided in me, shared his suspicions, his pain. David slid the envelope across the coffee table toward me. After his death, while settling his affairs, I discovered these among his personal papers. He'd hired a private investigator the last year of his life, but never acted on the information gathered. With slightly trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside were more photographs, Richard and Margaret together in various locations, on different dates than the ones I'd obtained. There were also hotel receipts, credit card statements, phone records, a comprehensive documentation of their affair spanning nearly a decade. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, looking up from the damning evidence. "Because Herbert would have wanted you to have it," David said simply. "And because what Margaret and Richard have done to both you and my brother should not go unchallenged." I studied him carefully. "You attended their wedding?" I did not. Margaret and I have maintained a civil distance since Herbert's death. She knows I'm aware of her infidelity, though we've never spoken of it directly. He reached for his coffee cup again. "I'm not a vindictive man, Mrs. Montgomery. I've made my peace with Margaret's betrayal of my brother. But when I heard about your stand last night from a mutual acquaintance who was present, I felt compelled to reach out. These would strengthen my position in the divorce proceedings," I said, gesturing to the envelope. "Yes, they would, and you're welcome to use them however you see fit." He hesitated. "But there's something else you should know, something that might be even more relevant to your situation." David extracted a final document from his portfolio, a legal agreement of some kind, embossed with the logo of Reynolds Publishing. Herbert made some changes to his will and to the company structure in his final months. Changes Margaret is unaware of. I scanned the document, legal terminology jumping out at me: transfer of ownership, conditional bequest, clawback provisions. Herbert suspected Margaret would remarry quickly after his death, David explained. He couldn't bring himself to cut her out entirely, but he did include provisions that would significantly reduce her inheritance if she remarried within 2 years. The implications were staggering. She doesn't know? No. The final version of Herbert's will has been held in escrow, with instructions that it be executed only after certain conditions were met. Margaret's remarriage within the specified time frame is one such condition. Why tell me this? I asked, genuinely puzzled. It doesn't directly affect my divorce. David smiled slightly. Doesn't it? Margaret stands to lose controlling interest in Reynolds Publishing and a significant portion of her inheritance. This will impact her financial standing considerably, and by extension, Richard's. The comfortable future they've planned together is about to become much less comfortable. I sat back, processing this unexpected development. When will they be informed? My lawyers are preparing the paperwork as we speak. It should be delivered within the week. He closed his portfolio. I wanted you to know first, to incorporate this information into your strategy. Why? I pressed. You don't know me. You have no stake in my divorce. David was quiet for a moment. My brother lived his final years knowing his wife loved another man. He died without ever confronting that truth or standing up for himself. He met my gaze directly. You chose a different path. I respect that enormously. He stood, preparing to leave. Use the information as you see fit, Mrs. Montgomery, or don't. But I thought you deserved to know the complete picture before finalizing any agreements. I walked him to the door, my mind reeling from this unexpected turn of events. Thank you for coming, I said, extending my hand. He shook it firmly. Herbert would have liked you, I think. You have something he lacked, the courage to speak uncomfortable truths. As I watched David Reynolds drive away, I felt an odd sense of kinship with a man I'd never met. Herbert Reynolds, another casualty of Richard and Margaret's self-serving narrative. I returned to my kitchen table, adding these new developments to my notes. Richard and Margaret had constructed an elaborate future based on combining their resources, her inheritance and publishing connections, his engineering reputation, and retirement accounts. Without Margaret's expected windfall, that future would look very different. The phone rang. Martin Goldstein, my lawyer. Eleanor, he said without preamble. Richard's attorney just called. They want to meet tomorrow to discuss an expedited settlement, I smiled to myself. I'll be there. And Martin, I have some new information that might be relevant to our position. The wheels of justice, it seemed, were turning faster than expected. The law offices of Goldman, Patel and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a downtown high-rise. Their reception area a study in understated luxury. Leather seating, abstract art, discreet lighting. I arrived 20 minutes early, dressed in a navy pantsuit I'd purchased the previous afternoon during a rare shopping spree. The ensemble was professional, elegant, and, most importantly, nothing Richard had ever seen me wear. Martin greeted me warmly, escorting me to a conference room where we could speak privately before the meeting. You look ready for battle, he observed with approval. I am, I confirmed, then briefed him on David Reynolds's visit and the unexpected leverage it provided. Martin's eyebrows rose incrementally as I spoke. When I finished, he gave a low whistle. Well, that changes the landscape considerably. Richard and Margaret are building their new life on financial assumptions that are about to be upended. Exactly, and they don't know it yet. which puts us in an excellent position. Martin laid out several documents on the table. Richard's lawyer has already proposed revised terms, still inadequate, but better than the original offer. They're clearly motivated to settle quickly after your public revelations. We spent the next 15 minutes reviewing our counterproposal, the new information strengthening our position without needing to be explicitly mentioned. By the time we heard voices in the hallway, our strategy was firmly in place. Richard entered first, followed by his attorney, Harold Winters, a contemporary of Martin's with a reputation for aggressive negotiation. They were followed by a court reporter who would document the proceedings. The moment Richard saw me, he faltered slightly. Perhaps it was the new outfit, so different from my usual modest dresses. Perhaps it was the straight-backed confidence of my posture, or the calm directness of my gaze. Whatever the cause, I registered his momentary disorientation with quiet satisfaction. "Mrs. Montgomery," Harold began once we were all seated, "we appreciate your willingness to meet on short notice. Given recent developments, we believe it's in everyone's best interest to reach a prompt and equitable resolution." "We agree entirely," Martin replied smoothly. "Prompt and equitable being the operative words." Harold slid a document across the table. "We've prepared a revised proposal that we believe addresses some of your client's concerns regarding the matrimonial home and ongoing financial support." Martin made a show of reviewing the document, though we'd already discussed its contents. "This is a step in the right direction," he acknowledged, "but still falls short of recognizing the full extent of Mrs. Montgomery's contributions to the marriage and Mr. Montgomery's career." Richard shifted in his seat, but remained silent, allowing his lawyer to speak for him. "Mr. Montgomery has been more than generous," Harold countered. "The matrimonial home, a substantial lump sum payment, and ongoing support well above standard guidelines for a marriage of this duration." "Generous?" Martin echoed with perfectly calibrated skepticism. "My client invested her entire inheritance into the matrimonial home. She worked to support the family during Mr. Montgomery's career setbacks. She forgoed her own education and career opportunities to facilitate his professional advancement." I watched Richard's face as Martin spoke, noting the tightening of his jaw, the subtle flush creeping up his neck. He hadn't expected this level of resistance. He'd assumed, as he had throughout our marriage, that I would eventually acquiesce to his terms. "Furthermore," Martin continued, "there's the matter of the undisclosed relationship with Margaret Reynolds during the marriage, which constitutes marital misconduct under state law." Harold's expression hardened. "We're not here to litigate the personal aspects of—" "On the contrary," Martin interrupted. "When personal decisions have financial implications, they become relevant to these proceedings. Mr. Montgomery diverted marital assets to sustain this relationship. Travel expenses, gifts, hotel accommodations. These expenditures constitute dissipation of marital assets." Richard leaned forward, finally breaking his silence. "This is absurd. I never—" Martin raised a hand, cutting him off. "We have documentation, Mr. Montgomery. Extensive documentation. Would you like me to present it now, or would you prefer to review our counterproposal first?" The tension in the room was palpable. Richard and his lawyer exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "We'll review your counterproposal," Harold said finally. Martin passed them our document. As Richard began to read, I saw the exact moment he registered the terms, his eyes widening slightly, fingers tightening on the paper. The tide had turned. For the first time in our 45 years together, I held the stronger position, and Richard knew it. 3 days after the settlement meeting, I was pruning roses in the backyard when I heard the distinctive sound of Richard's car in the driveway. I continued my gardening, calmly deadheading spent blooms as footsteps approached across the lawn. "Eleanor!" I turned unhurriedly, pruning shears still in hand. Richard stood a few feet away, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, his hair uncombed, small details that spoke volumes about his state of mind. "Richard?" I acknowledged. "I wasn't expecting you. Can we talk? Inside?" His voice held an unfamiliar note, something almost like pleading. I considered refusing, but curiosity won out. "All right, let me wash my hands." In the kitchen, I made coffee out of habit, the ritual providing a buffer as Richard seated himself at the counter where Catherine had sat just days before. The parallel wasn't lost on me. "The terms your lawyer proposed are impossible," he said without preamble once I placed a mug before him. "Half my retirement accounts, full ownership of the house, a lump sum payment of that size. It would leave me with almost nothing." "It would leave you with exactly what I'm left with," I corrected. "Half of what we built together." He ran a hand through his silver hair, a gesture so familiar it momentarily tugged at something deep within me. "Be reasonable, Eleanor. I'm 70 years old. I can't start over with nothing." "Neither can I. It's different for you. You're keeping the house. You have no expenses." "No expenses?" I interrupted. "The property taxes alone are substantial. The roof needs replacing. I'm 73 years old with no career, no pension of my own. Everything I have came through our marriage, a marriage you chose to end." Richard's expression hardened briefly before shifting to something more calculated. "What if—" he hesitated, then plunged ahead. "What if we reconsidered the divorce?" The suggestion was so unexpected I nearly dropped my coffee mug. "Excuse me?" "We had 45 years together, Ellie. That counts for something." He leaned forward, his tone softening, using the nickname he'd abandoned years ago. "I made a mistake. Got caught up in nostalgia, I suppose. Margaret and I, it's complicated." "I'm sure it is," I said dryly. "Especially since her inheritance is now in jeopardy." Richard's head snapped up. "What?" "Herbert's final will. The clawback provisions. Triggered by her remarriage within 2 years of his death." I sipped my coffee calmly. "You didn't know?" The color drained from his face. "That's not possible. She would have told me." Perhaps she didn't know either. According to David Reynolds, it was structured very carefully. "You've spoken to David?" Richard's voice rose slightly. "When? How?" "He came to see me. Brought additional documentation of your affair with Margaret. He seemed quite motivated to ensure I had all the facts." Richard stood abruptly, pacing the kitchen. "This changes everything. Margaret's position at the publishing house, the lakeside estate." He stopped suddenly, realizing he'd said too much. "Indeed," I agreed. "The comfortable future you planned together seems less secure now." He turned to me, desperation etched on his face. "Eleanor, please, we can work this out. For the sake of our history, our family," I repeated. "The same family you were willing to abandon for Margaret. The same history you were eager to rewrite as a mere detour from your true love." Richard moved closer, reaching for my hand. I was confused, misled by old feelings. "But we had something real, Ellie. All those years together. They meant something." I looked at his hand on mine. The familiar shape of it. The wedding ring now absent. Once, his touch would have weakened my resolve, made me question my own worth. Against his needs. Not anymore. I withdrew my hand gently but firmly. "Yes, they meant something to me. But clearly not to you, not until your other options began to crumble." "What do you want?" he asked, frustration edging into his voice. "Revenge? To see me destitute?" "I want what I've earned," I said simply. "My fair share of our life together. Nothing more, nothing less." Richard stared at me for a long moment, recognition dawning in his eyes. This was not the Eleanor he knew, the accommodating wife who could be reasoned, cajoled, or manipulated into compliance. This was someone new, someone he didn't know how to handle. The settlement meeting continues tomorrow, I reminded him. I suggest you consult with your lawyer before then. He left without another word, shoulders slumped in defeat. As I watched him drive away, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only a quiet certainty that I was, at last, standing firmly on solid ground. The final settlement agreement was signed on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 month after the wedding that had irrevocably altered the course of my life. I sat beside Martin in the judge's chambers, watching as Richard's pen moved across the document with reluctant finality. When he finished, he handed the pen to me, our fingers briefly touching in the exchange. Our eyes met for a moment, a fleeting connection that held echoes of a shared past without any promise of a future. I signed my name with steady strokes, officially ending 45 years of marriage. The terms were fair, even generous by conventional standards. I retained full ownership of the house on Maple Street, free and clear. Half of our retirement accounts and investments were transferred to my name. A lump sum payment compensated for my contributions to Richard's career and our family's stability. Most importantly, a clause acknowledged that my inheritance had paid off the mortgage, a small victory of truth over convenient fiction. "Congratulations, Mrs. Montgomery," Martin said as we left the courthouse, shaking my hand warmly. "You've secured your future." "Thank you for everything," I replied sincerely. "I couldn't have done this without your guidance." "You did the hard part," he countered. "You found your voice." As we descended the courthouse steps, I spotted Catherine waiting by the curb, leaning against her car. She straightened when she saw me, her expression a mixture of concern and relief. "It's done," I told her as she approached. "All signed and official." She nodded, glancing past me toward the courthouse entrance where Richard was emerging with his lawyer. "Are you okay?" "I'm at peace," I said, realizing as the words left my mouth that they were true. The anger that had fueled my initial stand had gradually transformed into something quieter but more enduring. A steady conviction in my own worth. "Can I take you to lunch?" Catherine asked. "To celebrate? Or commemorate? I'm not sure what the right word is." I smiled. "Lunch would be lovely." At a small bistro downtown, over soup and salad, Catherine filled me in on the aftermath of the wedding and subsequent events. "Dad and Margaret have postponed their Mediterranean cruise," she said. "Apparently there are some financial matters to resolve first." I nodded, unsurprised. The clawback provisions in Herbert's will had been executed as David promised, dramatically, altering Margaret's circumstances. The lakeside estate was being sold, her position at the publishing house reduced to an honorary role without controlling interest. "And how is your father handling this reversal of fortune?" I asked, more curious than concerned. Catherine studied her water glass. "Not well. He's staying with them, Margaret and her son, while they sort things out. Thomas has spoken with him more than I have, but—" She hesitated. "I think he's beginning to realize what he sacrificed for what he thought he wanted. There was a time when this knowledge would have brought me satisfaction, even vindication. Now I felt only a distant sadness for the man who had thrown away decades of commitment for a fantasy that had crumbled in his hands." "And you?" I asked. "How are things with James?" A small, determined smile crossed Catherine's face. "We're in counseling. It's challenging, but necessary. Watching what happened with you and Dad made me realize I don't want to wake up 30 years from now wondering why I never spoke up for myself." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand, deeply moved by this unexpected gift. My daughter, finding her voice through the echo of my own. As we finished our meal, Catherine hesitated before asking, "What will you do now, Mom, with the rest of your life?" It was the question I'd been asking myself since the night of the wedding, since the moment I'd realized I was free to choose my own path, for perhaps the first time in my adult life. I've enrolled in 2 courses at Millfield Community College, I told her. American Literature and Introduction to Psychology. Just to start. Catherine's eyes widened with genuine delight. You're going to college? At 73? Apparently so, I said, feeling a flutter of excitement and trepidation. It's something I've wanted since I was 18. It seems I'm finally getting around to it. As we left the restaurant, walking arm in arm toward Catherine's car, I felt the weight of the past month, of the past 45 years, gradually lifting from my shoulders. The divorce was finalized. The house was secure. My financial future was stable. The external conflicts had been resolved. Now came the truly transformative work, discovering who Eleanor Montgomery might become when she was no longer defined by what she had lost, but by what she had found, herself. 6 months after the wedding that had catalyzed my transformation, I stood in my garden on a crisp autumn morning, surveying the changes I'd made. The flower beds I'd once designed to Richard's specifications had been reimagined, wilder, more colorful, filled with varieties I'd always loved, but he had deemed too unruly. The patio furniture had been replaced with comfortable Adirondack chairs in vibrant blues and yellows, rather than the tasteful neutrals Richard had insisted upon. Small changes, perhaps meaningless to an outside observer, but to me they represented something profound, the reclaiming of space, the assertion of preference, the freedom to choose. Inside, the house had undergone similar subtle transformations. Richard's study was now my reading room, walls repainted from somber brown to a soft sage green, his imposing desk replaced with a comfortable window seat where I could study or simply watch the birds at the feeder outside. The formal living room we'd maintained for entertaining had been converted to a casual gathering space where I hosted weekly study groups from my literature class. My life had expanded in ways I hadn't anticipated. The college courses I'd tentatively begun had awakened a passion for learning long suppressed. I'd made friends among my classmates, most younger, some my age, all supportive of my belated academic journey. "You're our inspiration," my psychology professor had told me after I'd aced the midterm. A living reminder that it's never too late to begin again. Family dynamics had shifted as well. Thomas had remained distant initially, loyal to his father's narrative despite the evidence, but Matthew had acted as a bridge, insisting his father drive him to visit me regularly, gradually thawing the ice between us. Catherine had become a closer ally than I'd ever imagined possible. Our weekly lunches a highlight I looked forward to. Richard himself had faded from my life with surprising completeness. I heard occasional updates through the children, his hasty retreat from Margaret's home once her financial situation deteriorated, his temporary stay in Thomas's guest room, his eventual rental of a modest apartment near his old university. The grand romance had collapsed under the weight of practical realities, leaving him diminished but still stubbornly unwilling to acknowledge his mistakes. I felt no gloating satisfaction in his reversal of fortune, merely a philosophical acknowledgement of consequences naturally following actions. My focus remained firmly on my own journey forward rather than his path backward. On this particular morning, as I collected fallen leaves from the garden path, my phone chimed with a text from Harriet. "Exam results posted. Check online." With nervous excitement, I hurried inside, logging into the college portal to find my grade for the American Literature final examination. A. At 73, I had earned my first college A. Tears of pride and joy welled in my eyes as I snapped a photo of the screen and sent it to Catherine, Matthew, and Harriet, my personal cheerleaders in this new chapter. Catherine responded first. "Knew you could do it. Celebration dinner tonight?" Matthew's came next. "Awesome, Grandma! Smarter than all of us!" Finally, Harriet. "First day of many. So proud of you, friend." I set the phone down, moving to the kitchen window that overlooked my transformed garden. The woman reflected in the glass was someone I was still getting to know. A student, a grandmother, a gardener, a survivor. No longer defined primarily as someone's wife, but as herself. Eleanor Montgomery, author of her own story. The future stretched before me, not limitless perhaps at 73, but far more expansive than I had ever imagined possible. There would be more classes, new friendships, deeper connections with those family members who had chosen to grow alongside me. There would be challenges too. Aging, health concerns, the inevitable complications of life. But I would face them as this new version of myself, stronger for having been broken, wiser for having been foolish, and infinitely more authentic for having finally spoken her truth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.